Good morning, welcome everyone. I'm Dr. J. Polito from the Department of Surgery, and I'll be giving you a lecture on the principles of surgical oncology. Surgical oncology. Surgical oncology is a highly specialized field in surgery focused on the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of cancer based on the tumor biology. Surgical oncologist is a highly competent surgeon that acquires the skills in performing complex and non-complex cancer operation based on the tumor biology under a multi-specialty approach for the diagnosis and management of cancer. Under the principles of surgical oncology, we'll be discussing tumor biology, goals and principles in cancer surgery, principles of systemic therapy and radiation therapy, cancer treatment strategies under multidisciplinary approach, and some advances in oncology. In tumor biology, we need to understand how tumor develops and progress. We will be discussing under tumor biology the etiology, epidemiology, tumor growth and occurrence of metastasis, the pattern and distribution of metastasis, factors that affects the outcomes and prognosis of cancer based on their tumor profile, and of course the margins of resection when we perform any types of cancer surgery. In the etiology or carcinogenesis, we need to have a knowledge of the cell cycle. A cancer is thought to develop from a cell in which the normal mechanism for control of growth and proliferation are altered. In the first phase, known as the G1 phase or the GAP1, the cell undergoes biochemical changes to prepare for entry into S phase, in which new DNA is synthesized. In the S phase, the cell generates a complete copy of its genetic material and then proceeds into a second preparatory phase known as the G2 or GAP2 before it enters into mitotic phase. In the M phase, which is a mitotic phase, the replicated DNA is carefully condensed into compact chromosomes that are precisely segregated so that two daughter cells each receive a full complement of the genetic material. Following mitosis, a proliferating cell directly re-enters the G1 phase as it prepares for further replication. Any proliferating cell has an additional option, which is the entry into the quiescent state or the G0 phase. Entry into the G0 phase from G1 is an important decision in cellular development. It is largely governed by the presence or absence of growth factors or nutrients that allow the procession through G1 into S phase. If cellular environmental conditions are not right for a cell to proceed across the restriction point, it enters the G0 phase. Importantly, entry into the G0 may be reversible or it may be irreversible, such as during skeletal muscle or neuronal differentiation. Checkpoint control is more supervisory. Cell cycle checkpoints sense flaws in critical events such as DNA replication and chromosome segregation. When checkpoints are activated, for example, by under-replicated or damaged DNA, signals are relayed to the cell cycle progression machinery. These signals cause a delay in cell cycle progression until danger of mutation has been averted. In the G1S checkpoint, this checkpoint is the primary determining factor for cell division to take place. Growth factors are affecting the cell cycle and cells are growing. Once the R point is passed, the DNA is going to be replicated. So if a cell receives a go-ahead signal at this checkpoint, it will proceed with the cell cycle and divide. However, if the cell does not receive the go-ahead signal in G1, it switches to a non-dividing state called G0. If the cell passes the G1 checkpoint, it is usually committed to cell reproduction. In the G2 checkpoint, it represents the commitment for starting the process of mitosis. This checkpoint ensures that the DNA has been replicated correctly. If the DNA has been damaged, then the cell does not continue to mitosis. In the M spindle checkpoint, it ensures that all chromosomes are attached to the spindle in preparation for mitosis. The separation of the chromatids at this phase is irreversible. If something happens to these checkpoints that they become dysfunctional, such that even if there are problems in the number of growth factors at G1, or there's a damage to the replicated DNA at G2, or a problem with the spindle formation at the M phase, cell cycle proceeds, resulting to uncontrolled cellular replication, thus producing cancer. Proteins that control these checkpoints are called regulatory proteins. Perhaps the best known example are your cyclins and cyclin-dependent kinases. Regulation of cyclin-dependent kinase activity is central to all phases of the mammalian cell cycle. Factors associated with carcinogenesis are your carcinogens and hereditary genes. Exposure to carcinogens causes mutation of your normal genes, resulting to uncontrollable cell replication. Hereditary genes, even without exposure to carcinogens, later in time will be activated and promote carcinogenesis. Only about 10 to 15% of all solid tumors are associated with your hereditary genes. Cancer is a genetic disease. There exist two classes of such cancer genes: the oncogenes, which function as positive growth regulators, and the tumor suppressor genes, which function as negative growth regulators. Your proto-oncogene, when mutated, is called an oncogene. An oncogene has a gain of function of mutation of protein to excessively promote growth factors via gene amplification, point mutation, or chromosomal translocation. Example of your oncogene is your RAS oncogene, which you see in lung, pancreatic, colon, and thyroid cancer. You also have your HER2 new gene, which you see in breast cancer in 10 to 15% of the time. Your tumor suppressor gene blocks the G1S phase of the cell cycle and promotes apoptosis. Loss of function mutation of these tumor suppressor genes inactivates or abolishes the negative regulatory effect on the cell cycle, thus promoting cell cycle replication. Example of your tumor suppressor gene is your RB1 gene, your P53, and your BRCA1 and 2 gene. Almost 90% of cancer is sporadic and about 10% is hereditary. Examples of your hereditary genes associated with cancer are your APC, or your adenomatous polyposis coli gene, that is seen in familial adenomatous polyposis, your BRCA1 and 2, which you see in breast and ovarian cancer, and your mismatch repair genes, which are your MLH and MSH-MSI, which are seen in hereditary non-polyposis colorectal cancer. Suggestive findings in your clinical history that you're dealing with a patient with hereditary cancer are your having a male breast cancer patient at any age, having breast, colorectal, or endometrial cancer in a patient who's younger than 50, having two separate primary cancer in one patient, colon cancer or rectal cancer with high microsatellite instability, having more than 10 colon polyps, having a breast cancer, ovarian cancer, or pancreatic cancer patient with Jewish ancestry, or in a patient who has a family history of clustering of same cancer type. Carcinogens that are associated with cancer are your oncogenic viruses, your chemicals, and chronic irritation. Chemicals that are associated with cancer are your aflatoxin that causes liver cancer, your arsenic that causes skin cancer, estrogen replacement therapy, it is associated with endometrial cancer, your tamoxifen is also associated with your endometrial cancer, tobacco, highly associated with lung, oral, pancreatic, and esophageal cancer, and your benzidine, which is associated with your urinary bladder CA. Viruses that are associated with malignancies or cancer are your Epstein-Barr virus that causes gastric, CA, and lymphoma, hepatitis B and hepatitis C virus, which causes liver cancer, your HIV, highly associated with Kaposi sarcoma, and your HPV, which you find in cervical and vulvar cancer. Chronic irritation such as ulcerative colitis can promote colon cancer, your gastroesophageal reflux disease, which promotes esophageal adenocarcinoma, your Marjolines ulcer, which promotes or causes squamous cell carcinoma or basal cell carcinoma of the skin. Hallmarks of a cell that is cancerous are your sustained proliferative signaling, they are insensitive to growth suppressors, they are resistant to cell death, they have replicative immortality, they induce angiogenesis, they evade immune response, they create their own tumor microenvironment, and they have the capacity to invade and metastasize. This is just a picture of a breast mass which obviously has invaded the skin. So that's a hallmark of a cancer cell. And this is another picture of a patient with colon cancer that has metastasized to the liver. Again, a hallmark of a cancer cell. Going now to the epidemiology of cancer here in our country, the top five most frequent cancer are your lung, colorectal, prostate, liver, and leukemia in male, breast, cervical CA, colorectal CA, lung, and ovarian CA in the female. Knowing the incidence and mortality of each cancer will give you an idea which cancers are aggressive or fatal and which cancers are benign or having an indolent behavior and has a very good prognosis or having a good chances of surviving in the next 5 years. For example, your breast cancer, the incidence about 52%, but the mortality is just 19%. Compared with your lung and liver cancer, or in the incidence about 21 and 11% respectively, but the mortality is more than 50%, meaning patients with lung and liver cancer rarely survives more than 5 years upon diagnosis. Early detection through regular screening and treatment will save lives. We request for annual mammography to detect breast cancer in patients, female patients who are 45 years old and above. We request for low-dose chest CT scan to detect lung cancer in patients who have more than 20 packed years of smoking and are 50 to 80 years old with good performance status. Pap smear and HPV test for to detect cervical CA in female patients 25 years old and above. uh, Highly sensitive fecal immunochemical test or FOBT every year, colonoscopy every 10 years, flexible sigmoidoscopy every 5 years to detect colorectal cancer in patients who are 45 years old until 75 with average risk, and prostate specific antigen every 1 to 2 years, and digital rectal examination to detect prostate cancer in all male patients who are 50 years old and above. Let's focus now on the tumor growth. The tumor growth is best described by the Gumpersian curve. In the Gumpersian curve, it states that if the tumor is small in size, the growth rate is almost close to 100%, meaning the cells within that nodule or within that mass, almost all of them are in the cell cycle phase. Um, when they are still small, this is the time that usually they are easily treatable, meaning they are sensitive to treatment with surgery, with radiation therapy, and with chemotherapy. Remember, um, radiation and chemotherapy works very well in rapidly dividing cells. However, they become clinically detectable, meaning they have grown in size, they have increased in number of cells, a lot of these cancer cells go into the G0 phase or in the quiescent state, particularly if they have already achieved about uh, 1 billion in number of cancer cells, which by weight probably is about 1 kilogram. At this point, where there is already a decrease in the growth rate, because of the lack of nutrients and blood supply, uh, these cancer cells within that tumor becomes more aggressive. I'm speaking of those cancer cells that are in the cell cycle phase. Okay, aggressive in the sense that they can easily metastasize or they can easily invade the other surrounding structures. And at this point, we can say that they are very lethal. Wherein treatment such as surgery, radiation therapy, and chemotherapy are much, much less effective. Okay? Tumor growth can also be expressed in terms of volume doubling time. The range may take about 1 week to 1 year with a median doubling time of 60 days. Examples of these is your breast with a 130 days doubling time, your lung cancer, 160 days, melanoma is 140 days, your metastatic melanoma, about 64 days. The clinical implication is that if you have a patient, like for example, who comes to you with a sonographic findings of a 1 centimeter nodule and is not highly suspicious of malignancy, you may advise this patient to repeat or evaluate her breast with a repeat ultrasound after 3 to 4 months. And if uh, you're thinking about uh, that nodule to be malignant, you expect that the size of the tumor will be will increase to about 1.5 to 2 cm. Then that would be the time probably that you may want or advise this patient to undergo uh, tissue biopsy. That also goes for your lung cancer. If you have a patient with chest x-ray findings or CT scan findings of a 1 centimeter nodule and it can't be characterized to be benign or malignant, so you want to observe that nodule by repeating your imaging study to about 3 to 4 months and see if there's any increase in size, which will make it very suspicious for malignancy. Characteristics of tumors that are slow growing are they have longer survival, they have longer disease-free interval, meaning the time to recur after being removed, they have the less potential to metastasize, they are curable with surgery alone. Examples of these are your appendiceal carcinoma with low malignant potential, or what we call the pseudomyxoma peritonei, your well-differentiated thyroid carcinoma, like your papillary thyroid carcinoma or your follicular thyroid carcinoma. Fast-growing tumors have shorter survival, shorter disease-free interval, meaning after being removed, they recur within 6 months or 1 year. They are likely to metastasize upon diagnosis of the primary tumor. For example, your pancreatic cancer or pancreatic adenocarcinoma, your gastric adenocarcinoma, your esophageal adenocarcinoma, upon diagnosis, they usually present with distant metastasis. Fast-growing tumors are usually cured or can only be cured with multimodality treatment, meaning combination of surgery, chemotherapy, with or without radiation therapy. Tumor factors influencing occurrence of metastasis are your primary site or the primary organ where the cancer arises, the histology of the tumor, the differentiation of the tumor, the depth of penetration of the tumor, the genetic profile of the tumor, the size of the tumor, and the presence or absence of lymph node metastasis. Combination of these factors dictate the metastatic potential of a tumor. Example, in general, uh, if we compare the aggressiveness of a tumor just based on the organ or the site where the tumor arises, gastrointestinal tract oral cavity cancers develop early metastasis more than the cancers of the thyroid and the breast. Uh, Having adenocarcinoma versus a neuroendocrine tumor, the adenocarcinoma has more potential of developing early metastasis. A poorly differentiated tumor develops early metastasis than a patient with well-differentiated tumor. The depth of penetration, once a tumor penetrated the the submucosal layer, the chances of having metastasis is higher compared with tumors that are located only in the mucosa or just above the submucosa of a tissue. Having a genetic profile in patients with breast cancer that is positive for HER2 and negative for estrogen receptor has more potential of developing metastasis or early metastasis compared with HER2 new negative and estrogen receptor positive breast cancer. That also goes the same with the size of the tumor. Any tumor that is more than 2 cm has more potential to develop early metastasis than tumors with less than 2 cm. Having a positive lymph node or presence of metastasis to lymph node also has a higher chance of developing solid organ or distant metastasis to the liver or lung compared with cancers that have no lymph node metastasis or there's an absence of lymph node metastasis. Combination of these factors dictate the metastatic potential of a tumor. The route and pattern of metastasis. Tumor cells will detach, implant, and grow via lymphatic spread, hematogenous spread, or transcelomic spread. Transcelomic, this usually happens in tumors of the ovary and the gastrointestinal tract, particularly the stomach, the colon, and the appendix. It happens when the tumor has already penetrated the serosal lining of that organ. The cancer cells will spill inside the abdominal cavity and float around for a time, then will be implanted or seed into the surfaces of the small bowel and the abdominal cavity. We call that condition peritoneal carcinomatosis. Um, Lung cancers, they usually have spread into the lymph nodes, particularly the mediastinal lymph nodes. They also spread hematogenously, but rarely they produce transcelomic spread. That also goes for your breast cancer. They usually spread in the axillary lymph nodes. Your thyroid cancer, they usually metastasize to the cervical lymph nodes. For your colon, rectal, and stomach, they usually metastasize to the mesenteric, pelvic, and perigastric lymph nodes. Sarcoma, they rarely metastasize to the lymph node. Majority of them, or almost all of them, 90%, uh, they spread via uh, hematogenous route. They also don't have, they rarely produce transcelomic metastasis, except for sarcomas that are intraperitoneal. Mostly sarcomas are peripheral, no? Soft tissue sarcoma, upper extremity, lower extremity, retroperitoneum. But if you have an intraperitoneal sarcoma in the likes of a uterine leiomyosarcoma, they may present with peritoneal carcinomatosis, especially if they have already ruptured within the abdominal cavity. For the pattern of solid organ metastasis, metastasis to the brain usually comes from your lung cancer, your breast cancer, from melanoma, renal cell, and colorectal carcinoma. Lung metastasis frequently happens in renal cell carcinoma, colorectal carcinoma, melanoma, breast carcinoma, and sarcoma. Um, for colorectal carcinoma, you find lung metastasis
uh, when the patient already developed liver metastasis. Rarely that you will find colon and rectal cancer that has an isolated metastasis in the lungs only. Colorectal carcinoma more frequently metastasizes first to the liver, then to the lungs. Okay? In sarcoma, if we're dealing with a peripheral sarcoma, meaning extremity sarcoma, they usually metastasize to the lung. Okay? But if we're dealing with a retroperitoneal sarcoma or an intraperitoneal sarcoma, they usually metastasize to the liver. Metastatic tumors to the liver are frequent from colorectal cancer, pancreatic cancer, breast cancer, lung cancer, and stomach cancer. Bone metastases are frequent with breast, lung, prostate, renal cell, and colorectal cancer. The reason I'm explaining this to you is because knowing the pattern of distant metastasis, the pattern of lymph node metastasis, whenever you have a patient, you know where to look for metastasis. Like if you have a patient with breast cancer uh, with a huge tumor and clinically palpable axillary lymph node, which you think that the patient is already stage 3 and the risk for having distant metastasis is already high, you know what imaging test to request to predict where your distant metastasis is, which is in the lungs. Significance of lymph node metastasis and pattern of spread. They are very strong prognosticating factor for recurrence, metastasis, and survival. They are indicator for systemic therapy with or without radiation therapy. Lymph nodes are avenue of cancer cells to gain access to the systemic circulation. Most of the solid malignancies are known to involve or drain into the regional lymph node. Like for your breast cancer, they usually drain to the axillary lymph node first. For your thyroid cancer, they drain first the cervical lymph node. For gastric cancer, they usually drain, or the first echelon of lymph nodes that they drain to are the perigastric lymph nodes. For rectal cancer, they usually uh, drain first into the mesorectal lymph nodes. For colon cancer, they usually drain to the mesenteric lymph nodes along the vascular pedicle. The clinical application is that when you dealing with a non-metastatic tumor, like tumor of the breast, when we do surgery, we remove the breast together with the axillary lymph nodes. That goes the same for gastric CA. You just don't remove the stomach. You have to remove the stomach together with the perigastric lymph nodes because you know that it is very likely that these perigastric lymph nodes are already involved with uh, metastatic cancer cells. Factors that influences or increases the incidence of lymph node metastases are your size of primary tumor, depth of invasion of the primary tumor, and the histology. When it comes to size of the primary tumor, let's take for example a breast invasive ductal carcinoma of the breast with a size of more than 2 cm, the chances of having a regional lymph node metastasis in the axilla is about 15%. If you have a papillary thyroid cancer of more than 5 millimeter, the chances of lymph node metastasis in the cervical lymph node is about 15 to 65%. Now, if the depth of invasion of the primary tumor is at the submucosa or has invaded the submucosa, particularly tumors of the gastrointestinal tract, the possibility of having lymph node metastasis is about more than 20%. For tongue squamous cell carcinoma, a depth of invasion of more than 5 millimeter has an incidence of lymph node metastasis of more than 15%. For histology, if you have a epithelial adenocarcinoma of the GIT, you expect lymph node metastasis. For mesenchymal tissue tumor like your sarcoma, you don't expect lymph node metastasis. Lymph node metastasis influences prognosis of cancer as far as survival and local recurrence is concerned for tumors of the breast, colon, gynecologic malignancies, sarcoma, and oral squamous cell carcinoma. It doesn't have much impact on tumors of the thyroid. Meaning, other than the thyroid, if you have a lymph node metastasis in the breast, colon, ovary, or oral cavity squamous cell carcinoma, the survival decreases and the incidence of local recurrence increases. One good example of the influence of lymph node metastasis is in the breast cancer. If you have lymph node metastasis, the local regional recurrence rate is about 30% in the chest wall, particularly if you have axillary lymph node metastasis of about 1 to 3 lymph nodes. It also influences the survival rate of patients. If you have a uh, invasive ductal carcinoma with no lymph node metastasis, the 5-year survival is about 80% compared with about 50% if you have an axillary lymph node metastasis. The route and pattern of lymph node metastasis follows a particular order of involvement. Like in invasive ductal carcinoma of the breast, they initially metastasize to level 1, then proceed with level 2, then proceed with level 3 axillary lymph nodes. Then, uh, they later on involve intercostal, mediastinal, and supraclavicular lymph nodes. In squamous cell carcinoma of the anterior tongue, they initially metastasize to level 1, level 2, and level 3 before going to level 4 to 6 of the cervical lymph nodes of the neck. The clinical impact is that, for example, you have a 1 centimeter tumor of the tongue with no clinically palpable lymph node in the neck. Because of the size of the tumor and the possible depth of invasion, that there's already a risk of about 20% chance of having lymph node metastasis. Uh, you remove the level of lymph nodes in the neck, which has or is in the highest risk of harboring metastasis, which is in the level 1, level 2, level 3. Okay, we call that a prophylactic neck dissection or a supraomohyoid neck dissection. So now, whenever we deal with cancer, a patient diagnosed with cancer, it is mandatory that we stage the patient. We stage the patient because we want to measure the extent of the disease, estimate and predict their prognosis, and we could be able to plan the most appropriate treatment based on the stage of the patient and the biology of the tumor. The most used uh, staging system and the most popular staging system is the American Joint Committee on Cancer Staging System, which relies on the size of the primary tumor, the number of lymph node metastases, and the site of metastasis. In general, if you have a stage 0, abnormal cells are present but have not spread to the nearby tissue and has a very, very, very low chance of uh, developing distant metastasis. With stage 1 to stage 3, these are stages that are still curable, but as the stage increases, the prognosis decreases or worsens. Stage 4 means that the tumor has already spread into the uh, distant sites like your liver, lung, bone. And the prognosis uh, in general, okay, are worse. So, an example of the prognosis based on the stage is your invasive ductal carcinoma of the breast. In stage 0, the 5-year survival is about 100%. Remember, in stage 0, we're dealing with the carcinoma in situ. wherein the cancer cells have not penetrated yet the basement membrane. So they are less or least likely to have an access into the circulatory system. In stage 1, the survival rate of patients about 90% and above. In stage 2, the survival rate is about 80% in 5 years. In stage 3, it's about 52%. In stage 4, the 5-year survival is about 16%. I mentioned stage 4 as the worst survival in general. What I also want to emphasize that there are stage 4 tumors or cancers that have a longer survival, like patients with thyroid cancer, a well-differentiated papillary thyroid cancer. Even if it has already metastasized to the bone or the lung or both, we expect them to live for about 5 years or more. Okay? Compared with the pancreatic adenocarcinoma, that is stage 4, the life expectancy is about 6 months. Now we go with the tumor markers. Tumor markers are proteins that are secreted by your tumor that goes into the systemic circulation. So we can examine these proteins to check for recurrence of tumor or for presence of tumor. To check for presence of tumor, we usually rely on what is reliable is the PSA for prostate cancer, and for uh, your hepatocellular carcinoma, the alpha fetoprotein. Okay, I said this, I'm mentioning this because sometimes when you get the CEA that is elevated, it doesn't necessarily follow that you have a tumor in the colon and the rectum. However, if you are diagnosed to have a colorectal cancer, okay, that you were treated for colorectal cancer and you want to monitor for any recurrence, you request for a CEA. And if the CEA continues to elevate, it is 100% specific or 90% specific, meaning an elevating CEA for a non-smoker with a colorectal carcinoma signifies tumor recurrence. We now go to the goals of surgery in oncology, meaning applying surgery in cancer. We have 6 goals in surgery. First is your diagnostic surgery, your cytoreductive surgery, your prophylactic surgery, your palliative surgery, your supportive surgery. In diagnostic surgery, we perform diagnostic surgery to confirm the diagnosis or the histology of cancer. We make use of your fine needle aspiration biopsy, your core needle biopsy, your incision biopsy, or excision biopsy. In fine needle aspiration biopsy, we make use of the simple syringe. They have a thin hollow needle with a gauge 20 size of a needle. However, the specimen that we get from fine needle aspiration biopsy are only cells. The advantage is we can diagnose easily a tumor that is benign from a malignant tumor. It is safe, convenient, and simple. It is excellent for thyroid mass or thyroid nodule. The disadvantage is the inadequacy of this specimen to differentiate an in situ versus an invasive tumor, particularly in breast cancer. It is inadequate to determine or differentiate a sarcoma versus a carcinoma or a lymphoma versus a TB. The specimen may not be enough to perform immune staining also. In core needle biopsy, you make use of a large bore needle gauge 10 to 14, infiltrate the skin with a local anesthetic, make a small skin incision, and at least have 4 to 6 passes to get an ample amount of tissue and fix that tissue or specimen in a 10% formalin. In comparison with the fine needle aspiration biopsy specimen, wherein you fix the specimen in a 95% ethyl alcohol. The advantage of core needle is that it provides a degree of architectural information which increases the diagnostic yield. You can also perform immunohistochemical staining, which can aid to improve the diagnosis, and at the same time, particularly for breast cancer, you can perform some genetic profiling, like you want to know the status of your estrogen receptor and progesterone receptor and HER2 receptor in patients with breast cancer. Uh, the disadvantage is, well, the complications that develop from core needle biopsy, meaning you have a higher rate of developing hemorrhage or bleeding. That's why core needle biopsy shouldn't be used to biopsy tissues that are in close proximity with a major blood vessel. Like in the neck, don't do core needle biopsy of tumors in the neck because it's uh, very near the jugular vein, the carotid artery. Okay? For incision biopsy, this type of or kind of biopsy is no longer done except if your core needle biopsy is insufficient to tell you the diagnosis. Uh, it's not being done more frequent nowadays because of the danger or risk of tumor spillage. However, if you do an incision biopsy, you make a small wedge of tumor with normal tissue, remove. The incision should be parallel to the relaxed skin tension lines to allow tension-free closure. The advantage is larger tissue samples, which will equate to higher diagnostic yield. The disadvantage is what I said earlier, uh, tumor spillage, surgical site infection also. In excision biopsy, there's complete removal of the mass with a margin of normal tissue. It can be both diagnostic and curative in benign tumor or cancer with low malignant potential, such as your lipoma, low-grade sarcoma, phyllodes, or gastrointestinal stromal tumor. The advantage is you remove the whole mass, which may be the only surgical treatment needed in those types of low malignant potential tumor or benign tumor. The disadvantage is that it's always an open procedure and invasive. Tumor seeding is also a concern. So for the accuracy, the open biopsy still is the most accurate among all the biopsy procedures. The second most accurate is your core needle biopsy, which is an acceptable uh, type of biopsy procedure that can give you uh, an accurate diagnosis. The least sensitive is your fine needle aspiration biopsy. Another goal of surgery in oncology is palliative surgery. We perform palliative surgery to palliate symptoms of patients with incurable disease who we think or deem to have uh, survival of at least more than 6 months. And the type of operation that you want to perform in this patient has a low risk of developing surgical complications. Patients can be made comfortable with palliative surgery by addressing the pain, bleeding, or GIT obstruction. Like, for example, a patient with colon CA that is already metastatic to the liver and to the lungs, but the sizes of the metastases are like 1 or 2 cms only. Uh, and then you still have an intact primary tumor in the colon, and that primary tumor has already obstructed the colon. So even if this patient is already stage 4, but you think the survival of this patient will be more than 6 months with palliative treatment like chemotherapy, you can still perform uh, resection of the bowel with the tumor. And we call that palliative surgery. We resect it to halt the bleeding or to address the obstruction in the gastrointestinal tract. Like for this patient who has a sarcoma, a recurrent sarcoma of the posterior thigh, um, the sarcoma keeps on bleeding and is severely infected. It's really debilitating to the patient. Without any form of palliative resection, this patient will die of bleeding or infection. But if the patient won't bleed, if we could be able to stop the bleeding and we can be able to control the infection, we presume that this patient with the palliative treatment like chemotherapy and radiation could still survive longer for at least more than 6 months. So that's why even the procedure is a very extensive procedure, uh, we still proceeded with hemipelvectomy, knowing that the risk of developing complications with hemipelvectomy is acceptable, meaning the risk of the patient dying in the OR is less than 10%. Here's another example of palliative surgery, relieving intestinal obstruction in stage 4 colon carcinoma with unresectable primary tumor. A palliative procedure in the form of fecal diversion or colostomy was done. Another type of surgery in oncology is prophylactic surgery. It is done to reduce the risk of developing carcinoma in the future. Examples of which are your prophylactic mastectomy for patients with mutations in the BRCA1 and 2 in the gene, a subtotal colectomy for a patient with multiple polyposis of the colon, uh, an endoscopic colonoscopy with polypectomy during screening is a prophylactic form of surgery also, because as I've mentioned earlier, removing the polyp in the colon will reduce the risk of that patient developing cancer, because that polyp 5 or 10 years from the time of diagnosis might be converted into or might turn into a cancer. Another goal of surgery is supportive surgery, which is performed for nutritional access or medical treatment. Example of which is your portacat and your feeding tube. Portacat is a device that is implanted underneath the skin with a tube that is tunneled inside a large vein. We usually encounter patients, cancer patients who have already undergone several treatment cycles of chemotherapy, and their peripheral veins are already fibrosed, wherein we no longer have access for medical drug infusion or infusion for nutritional support. So that's why this device was developed. Another form of supportive surgery is your placement of tubes for feeding, either in the jejunum or in the stomach, for patients who could no longer eat through their mouth, particularly those patients with bulky head and neck tumor. This is a picture of a patient with a cervical esophageal cancer of the cervical region, which was resistant to treatment. So for him to be fed, we need to put a tube into the stomach. One of the most important goals in surgery for cancer patients is a curative surgery. We perform curative surgery if the tumor is resectable and can be cured with surgery, meaning we could establish immediate local regional control and there are no signs or symptoms of or evidence of distant metastasis. The principles of curative surgery in oncology is performing an oncologic resection. Oncologic resection means uh, pertains to the completeness of resection of the primary tumor and the draining lymph nodes at risk of metastasis based on the knowledge of the margins of resection, pattern of lymph node involvement. They are usually performed or they're performed in a non-metastatic setting. Oncologic resection pertains to removing tumor with adequate margins of normal tissue and ensuring no gross and microscopic cancers will be left behind. We should be familiar with the terminologies like R0, which means no microscopic tumor at margin of resection, and R1, there's a positive microscopic tumor at the margins of resection, and R2, there's a positive gross residual tumor. If you have a positive tumor at the margins of the specimen or the margins of resection, then you can assume that you have left behind microscopic cancer cells also. So, an oncologic resection is an R0 resection. The primary tumor should be removed, if possible, in continuity with the regional lymph node. Like, for example, an invasive ductal carcinoma, you remove the breast together with the axillary lymph nodes in continuity. We call that modified radical mastectomy. In rectal cancer, we remove the primary tumor in the rectum together with the mesorectum, wherein we know the nodal metastasis is to the mesorectum. In tongue CA, squamous cell carcinoma of the tongue, we do wide excision, meaning there's a margin of normal tissue, plus neck dissection. Now, if the lymph nodes are not at risk for metastasis, the goal of curative surgery is complete resection of the primary tumor with negative margins of resection only. Examples of which are your gastrointestinal tumor of the stomach. We only perform wide excision or partial gastrectomy with margins of resection, with negative margins of resection. For liposarcoma, we perform wide excision only with pathologic negative margins of resection. Because these two tumors, we all know by tumor biology, they don't frequently metastasize to the lymph node. If the primary tumor invades or is seen contiguous with another organ or tissue, the goal is to do en bloc resection of the primary tumor, not piecemeal, to avoid spillage of cancer cells. Meaning, you don't splice or cut the tumor in between the organ of the primary tumor and the organ that it invaded. Splitting the tumor equals spillage of cancer cells, and that becomes a non-oncologic resection. And it will upstage the stage of the patient. You will convert a non-metastatic stage to a metastatic stage. This is a picture of a cancer of the stomach that has involved the left lateral segment of the liver. So you don't separate the liver from the stomach, but you remove the stomach together with the segment of the liver. We call that en bloc resection. Another example of an en bloc resection is an adenocarcinoma of the stomach with invasion of the colon. As you can see, you could appreciate the segment of the colon together with the stomach that was removed en bloc. So what is margins of resection? Margins of resection is the distance from the edge of the tumor, either grossly or microscopically, to the edge of the normal tissue or non-tumorous tissue resected. Oncologic margins of resection varies according to the site or organ of origin of the primary tumor and its histology. Positive margins of resection greatly increases local recurrence. These are examples of your organ with the corresponding margins of resection. Your squamous or adenocarcinoma of the esophagus, the proximal margin of resection, the distance from the edge of the tumor is about 10 centimeters. The distal edge, the distal part of the esophagus should be at least 5 centimeters from the tumor. And the circumferential radial margin should be at least more than 1 millimeter. For carcinoma of the stomach, the proximal margins of resection is more than 5 centimeters, and the distal margin of resection should also be 5 centimeters. For colon adenocarcinoma, the margin of resection corresponds to the vascular pedicle supplying the colon, which usually equates about 8 to 10 centimeters of the colon, proximal and distal to the tumor. For rectal adenocarcinoma, the proximal margin of resection is about 5 cm, and the distal margin of resection is at least 1 centimeter. The circumferential radial margin of the CRM should be negative for any tumor metastasis. In invasive ductal carcinoma of the breast, for breast conservation surgery, which is doing a wide excision of the primary tumor, you at least should have a margin of resection of 2 millimeter or negative tumor in the ink margin. For non-melanoma skin tumor with a size of less than 2 centimeter, the margin of resection is about less than 5 millimeter. For oral cavity squamous cell carcinoma, the margin of resection is more than 1 centimeter. For sarcoma, it's about 5 centimeter proximal and distal to the tumor. This is a picture or a specimen of a rectal carcinoma, the distal third of the rectum. You would appreciate that the margins of resection is 1 centimeter distal and 5 centimeter proximal to the tumor. It was removed and blocked with a mesorectum. This is squamous cell carcinoma of the oral cavity, floor of the mouth, with cervical lymph node metastasis on the ipsilateral side. We mark the edge of the tumor with a 1 centimeter margin all around the tumor. And these are the clinically positive lymph nodes. So this is the operative field. We remove the floor of the mouth in continuity with the cervical lymph nodes. Level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this is the specimen. The floor of the mouth together with the mandible. The lymph nodes were not shown in this picture. And this is how it looks like after the reconstruction. This is a basal cell carcinoma of the skin. We mark the edge of the tumor with at least more than 4 millimeter margin from the edge of the tumor. We did a wide excision and then reconstruction. This is another procedure, a curative procedure, curative surgery for an invasive advanced breast carcinoma, wherein the patient was non-responsive to neoadjuvant therapy. We did a radical mastectomy and axillary lymph node dissection. Of course, the margins of resection is negative. We included the chest wall, the pectoralis major muscle, and ample amount of skin that is far from the tumor. This is a early stage of liposarcoma of the anterolateral tie. We did wide excision with the surgical margins of at least 5 centimeters. So, another goal of surgery in oncology is cytoreductive surgery. So, what is cytoreductive surgery? Cytoreductive surgery is a surgical removal of gross tumors in the metastatic setting. This is done in stage 4 with limited or resectable metastasis, provided that the tumor biology is favorable, meaning they have a long disease-free interval and has a known sensitivity to adjuvant treatment, particularly chemotherapy. These are indicated for cancers of the appendix with low malignant potential, or what we call the pseudomyxoma peritonei, or for cancers of the ovary. They are known to be very sensitive to platinum chemotherapeutic drugs. And we also do cytoreductive surgery for limited colorectal liver metastasis or limited limited peritoneal carcinomatosis of the colon and the rectum. The best clinical outcomes for this type of patients is if after cytoreductive surgery, there are no residual gross tumor. With cytoreductive surgery, we could be able to improve the survival of patients, even if they are already stage 4. This is a patient with peritoneal carcinomatosis from an ovarian cancer. Did cytoreductive surgery, and after removing the tumor, it appears that there are no gross residual disease. This is a patient with colon cancer with metastasis to the liver, an isolated solitary liver metastasis. We did resection of the primary tumor together with the metastatic tumor to the liver. Patients who undergo cytoreductive surgery for like this kind of patients, colorectal cancer with solitary liver metastasis, the survival of this patient in 5 years can be as high as 60%, which is comparable to a stage 3 patients. This is the segment of the liver with a tumor inside. As you can see, you couldn't appreciate the tumor itself because it is within the liver tissue, ensuring that there is a margin of normal tissue and an R0 resection. Okay, so for the principles of systemic therapy, one of the systemic therapy that we use is your chemotherapy. The goal is to kill cancer cells by interfering with its cell cycle with serious damage to the normal cells. It is indicated for cancer with risk for distant metastasis or recurrence that it can improve the chances of cure or longer survival. It is effective for lymphoma, colorectal cancer, particularly adenocarcinoma type of colorectal cancer, and your invasive ductal carcinoma of the breast. It's not effective for sarcoma, thyroid cancer, or your gastrointestinal stromal tumors. Chemotherapy are given in combination to lessen the dose of each drug, thereby lowering the side effect of each drug. They are given every 14 to 21 days to allow the normal cells to recover prior to the next cycle of chemotherapy. These are just examples of your chemotherapeutic drug with their specific mechanism of action, like your taxanes. Your taxanes, particularly docetaxel and paclitaxel, they have their effect in the G2 and M phase. Your anti-metabolites, like your folate, your fluorouracil, they act on the DNA phase or the S phase of the cell cycle. So particularly, the mechanism of action of chemotherapeutic drugs are directed or involves the your phases in the cell cycle. In comparison with your targeted therapy, they are a new form of cytotoxic therapy. They block the growth of cancer cells by interfering with the specific targeted molecules needed for carcinogenesis and tumor growth rather than by simply interfering with the rapidly dividing cell cycle or proliferating cells, which are your traditional chemotherapy. But for you to be able to apply this kind of treatment, you have at least an idea or you have a test for the specific gene for that particular tumor or in that drug will be effective. For example, in breast cancer patients, you try to identify if that invasive ductal carcinoma of the breast has a mutation in the or has a estrogen receptor molecule that causes the uh, cell proliferation in breast cancer. So if it is positive for estrogen receptor, then you can give a drug that blocks the coupling or the binding of the estrogen to the estrogen receptor. We call that drug tamoxifen. Another example is in your gastrointestinal stromal tumor. If your GIST has a CD117 receptor at the surface of the cancer cell, we can block this receptor using a monoclonal antibody like your imatinib. Another form of systemic therapy is your immunotherapy. It blocks the protein molecule released by the tumor that binds to the cytotoxic T cell, suppressing its function. The principle is cancer cell came from a normal cell. So if it's already a cancer cell, it's supposed to be foreign to your body and it should be attacked by your antibody. It so happened that these cancer cells, these tumors, they release molecules that suppresses the function of your T cell. We call that the uh, program death ligand 1. Okay, so we have that drug that blocks that molecule from being produced by the tumor cell such that the immune cell, their T cell, could be able to recognize that cancer cell and attack that cancer cell. That's a new form of systemic treatment, immunotherapy. Principles of radiation therapy. The principle of radiation therapy is that the therapeutic effect is local, just like performing an oncologic resection for a particular tumor. The effect is local. Uh, it is indicated if there is a risk for local recurrence despite oncologic resection. It has a curative role in early stage tumor of nasopharyngeal carcinoma, cervical carcinoma, and oral cavity cancer. It induces DNA damage to cancer cells by creating double strand breaks in the sugar phosphate backbone of the DNA. It affects rapidly dividing cells, particularly those cells in the G2 and M phase. Uh, we usually use radiation therapy after oncologic resection if we're dealing with tumors like oral cavity squamous cell carcinoma with lymph node metastasis in the neck. Having a lymph node metastasis in the neck increases the chances of having local recurrence. We also use radiation therapy after oncologic resection for sarcoma that is high grade by differentiation, because in high grade sarcoma, the local recurrence is high despite a negative margins of resection compared with the low grade soft tissue sarcoma. Factors affecting radiosensitivity is your oxygen tension. Uh, Oxygen tension prolongs half-life of free radicals, meaning if your tumor is huge. You assume that there are a lot of necrotic tissues inside. Having a lot of necrotic tissues within the tumor decreases the oxygen tension, thereby uh, lowering the chances of radiation therapy to be effective. Remember, uh, radiation therapy heavily relies on the formation of your free radicals. And free radicals, uh, for you to have a large amount of free radicals, you must have a well oxygenated tissue. Drugs that improve sensitivity to radiation is your 5-fluorouracil and doxorubicin, and your platinum agents like your cisplatin. Treatment strategies in cancer. If you give um, chemotherapy or radiation therapy prior to a curative resection, we call that neoadjuvant therapy. If you give your chemotherapy or radiation therapy or both before after a curative resection, we call that adjuvant therapy. Neoadjuvant therapy is a form of treatment strategy where you give your chemo with or without radiation therapy to downsize the tumor, to shrink the tumor. Um, it may potentially convert a borderline resectable tumor to a more resectable disease. It may improve the chances of achieving clear margins of resection. It may facilitate organ or function preservation if outright surgery will compromise function and aesthetic. I emphasize that it may, because there's also a high chance that it may not work. Okay, but another advantage of giving systemic chemotherapy prior to surgery is that you could be able to appreciate if the tumor will respond with the chemotherapy that you that the same chemotherapy can be given or will be given after surgery. Meaning, if, like for example, if on, like in breast cancer, I know from the upfront that upon doing a mastectomy or breast conservation surgery, this patient will need adjuvant therapy. By giving chemotherapy first, you would be able to know if that tumor is responsive to that particular drug. Except if you have removed it already and you give chemotherapy, the only time that you would know that if the tumor was responsive to the drug is that if hindi na bumalik yung tumor after 2 years, after 3 years, or after 5 years. But it is very important to know that neoadjuvant therapy influences survival, meaning it can prolong survival if it achieves a complete pathologic response. Meaning, if you give neoadjuvant therapy and the tumor shrinks only to about 99.9%, and there's a 1.1% that did not respond to the drug, it has the same survival with the patient who never responded to the neoadjuvant treatment at all. Okay? But if you develop a complete pathologic response, meaning zero viable cancer cells upon removal of the tumor under the microscope, there is a trend that the survival is longer. But for me, it only reflects that the tumor is really very sensitive to the systemic drug, which means even uh, if I use that drug to that very sensitive tumor, even if I give it before surgery or after surgery, the survival of that patient still would be longer. So the challenge is uh, to be able to find out, to have a test that would tell us which drug will be most effective to a particular tumor. Okay? So adjuvant therapy, it's a treatment given after surgery. It improves overall survival and decreases the risk of local and distant recurrence. Indicated for tumors in advanced stage or early stage, but with significant risk of recurrence based on tumor factors or possible residual disease after surgery, thereby lowering the chances of survival. Ini, this is very important, particularly if you did remove a tumor that is an R1 resection or an R2 resection. And for patients with an R0 resection, for as long as uh, the risk of recurrence is low, you don't need to have adjuvant therapy. But if the risk is high, even with an R0 resection, you have to give some form of adjuvant treatment. So advances in oncology, uh, these are your genomics and proteomics in oncology. Genomics meaning determining the exact genetic sequence of a particular tumor, and proteomics is the proteins that are produced or encoded by the mutated genetic sequence in that particular tumor. Okay? With genomics, we were able to formulate or personalize the treatment in cancer. We call that a targeted therapy. Uh, for example, in lung cancer, 20% of lung cancer have a mutation in the epidermal growth factor receptor of that cancer cell. EGFR is a cell surface receptor that activates downstream pathways for cellular proliferation. Inhibition of the EGFR pathway can lead to apoptosis. A particular drug, which we call the tyrosine kinase inhibitor, one of which is gefitinib. There are a lot of TKIs. It inhibits or blocks the EGFR, which results to improve overall progression-free survival in non-small cell lung carcinoma. Another example of a targeted treatment by using a genomics is in your invasive ductal carcinoma of the breast, identifying uh, expression of estrogen receptors in the breast cancer cell. We were able to target those cancer cells by blocking the estrogen receptors using tamoxifen or a selective estrogen receptor modulators. Another form of uh, hormonal therapy in breast cancer that expresses estrogen receptors is your aromatase inhibitors. It decreases the production of your estrogen. So, whenever we see patients with breast cancer that expresses estrogen receptor, in layman, we think of, ang nagpapatakbo dun sa tumor na yan, ang food ng tumor na yan, or what keeps it growing is the estrogen. So, we need to do something to block or decrease the production of your estrogen. In breast cancer also, we were able to identify the overexpression of your HER2/neu, which also regulates the cell cycle in breast tumor. There's a drug that blocks the HER2/neu receptors. This is called, it's a molecular antibody called trastuzumab. In colon cancer, in 10 to 15% of colon cancer, there's a wild-type KRAS gene mutation, which can be addressed with a molecular antibody also, which we call cetuximab. It also prolongs the progression-free survival of metastatic colon carcinoma patients.
Through genomics, we were able to identify specific genetic signatures that could be able to tell us which cancers will recur even in patients who have early stage malignancies. it also could be able to provide us some information if this cancer may or may not benefit with systemic adjuvant therapy. Examples of these genetic signatures or genetic profiles are your 70 gene microarray and 21 gene assay in breast cancer. In proteomics is a study of entire set of proteins expressed in cell, tissue, or individual. Proteomics involves protein expression, profiling, protein modification, protein-protein interaction, protein structure, and protein function. It provides key information such as protein targets and signaling pathways related to growth and metastasis of cancer cells. It is utilized to diagnose, prognosticate, and predict treatment response. Example of which is your MALDI-MS analysis of pre-treatment serum to predict responsiveness to epidermal growth factor receptor in lung cancer. Local treatment modalities for tumor control in stage 4 or unresectable tumor. These are your radiofrequency ablation, microwave ablation, selective intraarterial radiation therapy. In radiofrequency ablation and your microwave ablation, you make use of a needle that can be percutaneously inserted into the tumor, and the tip of the needle will generate excessive heat to ablate the tumor. In selective intraarterial radiation therapy, this makes use of very small radiation beads that can be inserted into the arterial supply of the tumor, and it will be placed at the center of the tumor, and it contains radiation that will ablate the tumor. So in summary, success in the treatment of cancer heavily relies on the knowledge and application of the tumor biology, recognition and mandatory observation of surgical oncologic principles, and collaboration among other disciplines in oncology to come up with the treatment that would benefit the patient most. Thank you.